Okay, welcome everyone. Nice to see so many people here. Today is a Meet the Director event. I generally like to say, even though it's Meet the Director, it's really not meet me. It's really more about meet the program, right? And with that, let me just kind of put in place the faces that we have behind the program. And you'll notice in my odd sense, so the background is blurred out faces of all the students. And then, we're very fortunate today, not just to have the program team that you see on the left there, but to also have the students, right? So we have two students here from the second year. So the first cohort of the masters, but in their second year, which is Tiziana and Matthew. And then we have two students from the first year's cohort, Arta and Heiko. And this is something that is really important to us. And the main thing is the students are co-creators, they're owners, they're partners in making this program really all that it can be. In addition, when I think about the students and I say the students are a part of the program, today I have to recognize that we also have all of you here today. And if I think about this, one of the things, when we look through who has registered for this, and looking around at the attendees, what's really nice, from our standpoint, is to look at this and see that the people that have registered for this event, this dialogue, this discussion, are really reflective of the diversity that we have within our own cohort, right? So we have over 100 registrants for this talk from 30, I think something like 34 different countries, which seems to be similar to what we have in terms of our own cohort. Our own cohort consists of 35 different nationalities as well, and people coming from all different types of backgrounds. So to give you an idea today, I obviously want to give an introduction to the program and talk through this, but we'd have to acknowledge, sort of the elephant in the room, which is the current crisis that we're going through, right? So let me just try and lay out what it is we're going to talk about today, right? So first, naturally, I want to give a representation of what our program is about. Probably not going to spend too much time on that because, most likely the fact that you are here today, taking part in this, you've done your research and know some things about the program. But still, I hope to try and fill in any gaps there. But I think the second point is one that's really important, right? It's one to say, how have we been impacted by the COVID crisis? And it's there are the obvious negative impacts, right? So it's that it's taken a lot of the normalcy away, and I think we all have a really distinct longing for this, right? And we're all experiencing that loss. But as we'll talk about a little bit later, there are, especially for a program like ours, there's been a silver lining, right? And I think we as a program, it's really been a nice opportunity to surface and exhibit a lot of the positive qualities of our program. And when I say, the positive qualities of our program, I'm really talking about the positive qualities of our students, right? So nothing like a crisis really shows people's true colors and the true colors of our students and what we really stand for. This has really been shown in just a tremendously positive way through the crisis. Naturally, then a big part of today is the Q&A section, right? So the Q&A, this is not just a Q&A with me. This is not just a Q&A with the program team. This is why we're really fortunate that we have the students here, right? So we can tell you things, the program team can tell you stuff, but the students' perspective always makes this a lot richer. And again, we're fortunate to have them here. So please, when we get to the Q&A, please feel free to ask them and ask for their perspective. This is something we want to put forth. Okay, so starting off, kind of what is our program about, right? And And our program, if you've done any research and looking on our program, you'll hear us talk a lot about, and if you've engaged with me at all, I always will talk about the 3 pillars of our program, right? The academic insight, the practical application, and the peer and community engagement. And there's a reason we speak about these so much, is because we're really, we're what makes us special is the fact that, especially in entrepreneurship, any one of these is just not enough, right? So to have the academic theory and the academic rigor, yes, this is extremely valuable to provide clarity of thought, to understand contingencies, but it's not enough, right? Especially, again, in entrepreneurship, we need the practical application and the ability to resonate between, okay, what are some of the frameworks and how is this being applied and what's going on now? How do I apply this to my own venture? Figuring that out is where real learning happens. And then on top of that, to have the peers, the cohort, where you say, wait a second, we both listened to this lecture, we both heard this practitioner, and you walk out of there, and now you're debating, wait a second, I heard A, you heard B, how do we reconcile this? Again, the dialogue that happens there, this is really where we live. So we really live at the intersection of all 3. And we want students, right, that want the complementarities, that value the complementarities. We don't want people that just want the academic rigor. And we want to be very open that if you're here just because of the academics and you just want another degree, then we're not really the right program for you. We want people that want all 3. Okay, transitioning kind of from what we're about, how does this really fit into the overall timeline and how do we actually deliver it? Obviously, we're a blended program, now blended, part-time, hybrid, whichever language you want to use on that. The key part is, and it's important to say up here, I have the sequence and the structure of the program under normal times. Now, obviously right now, this is far from what we would consider to be normal times. And when you look at the sequence of the structure that we have up here, the first thing on this is the September residential. And naturally, I think on everyone's mind is saying, okay, well, what are you going to do about the September residential? Is this going to happen? I think it's important, I don't want to stand here today and pretend that I have better information than anybody else out there and to be able to say, absolutely, this is what's going to happen. The truth is, I don't think any of us can say with certainty what will happen in September. So I think it's much better that that what I tell you is, what are we planning for? What do we hope to do? And where is our thinking at, right? So with regard to September, the best case scenario, right, would be that we're hopeful that we're able to offer a physical September residential, right? So where students can come here and we can get on as normal as possible. Now, again, by no means do I even believe in the best case scenario that all students would be able to come to Cambridge and have a September residential as if, we're through the crisis completely. Even in the best case scenario, we're absolutely recognize that there's going to be students that can't travel here, right? So what we're planning for is the best case scenario, we run a physical residential, and in parallel to that, we run a hybrid. So we run everything online and physical, and we accommodate and adapt as needed to accommodate all students, right? And this is, we already have things in preparation for that. This speaks even to some of the benefits that we're seeing through the COVID crisis. So it's pushed boundaries within the university that normally were firm constraints. Now people are being forced to adapt, and it's enabling a lot of benefits for us. The example I use from that is IT inductions, right? So IT inductions were always a hard constraint that no matter what, you had to be physically present in Cambridge to be able to get your password for your email and your password for your account. already we have, there's plans in place, and IT has adapted this to say, yes, you know what, we can induct people in September residential and do this remotely, right? Which, by the way, will benefit us in the future as well, because then activities that aren't the most value added, if we can do those outside of the residential and really bring in solid value added activities for the residential, that will be phenomenal. So to take us through kind of the sequence, the short end is September. We're hoping for physical. At best, we'll do physical and online. There could be the case that it's fully online. And as I'll talk a little bit later, this is similar to how we had planned for the March residential. We'll adapt and make use of all of the resources that we have to make it happen. So I did see the one question up there. I'll try and address that. It's hard for me to capture them all as they go, but there is, I think it was a question in terms of the chat of postponing to October, and it's a fantastic one. And boy, do we wish we could. There's the rationale we can't is that the Master of Studies programs, or programs like ours, the timetabling of the school, what you'll notice is every single one of our residentials is done outside of the term time of the other full-time residential degree programs, right? So we have the MBA program there, we have the MPhil there. These programs are there full-time, and they occupy the space. And so all of our residentials have to be outside of that. So once we push it into October, there's no place for us to fit, right? So this is when I say we do everything and pull on every single lever that we can within the constraints that exist. So I don't want to make promises that yes, we can move it all around when those are constraints that we operate under. But that's a fantastic question. And there's certain things, the key is we're trying to move stuff around when it makes sense and when it's possible, right? So that's very long-winded on September, but I wanted to address that because that's another elephant in the room of saying, okay, here we are waiting for this, what's going on in September? And I think it's important to talk about that. The other bits that are probably more straightforward is just that the first year is where most of the residentials are, right? So we have 4 residentials over 2 years, but they're heavily front loaded in terms of there's 3 residentials in the first year. The rationale for that, once you look at the scheduling, makes sense that each residential has to touch on part of the curriculum. So when we have the full classes done in the first year, so the first year is heavily loaded with the academic content, right? So the core courses happen and the elective courses happen, whereas the second year is all about synthesizing this in terms of a research project, right? So the thesis. So we have the first residential kicks off the first part of the core. Then we'll have the Christmas break, the winter break. Then we kick off the Lent term. The March residential wraps up the core courses and then starts the elective courses. And then in June is where we kick off the last set of electives. Now, in terms of, that's really speaking to the academic piece of it, but that's by far not what the residentials are all about, right? And actually, if I were to even say one more thing, I'll get to some of the learnings here from the COVID bit. Some of it is, there's a lot more that we try and pack into residentials, and we're now learning how can we kind of pull some of that out of the residentials and do some of that online, right? To allow for more of the other parts of the residential. So what are the other parts? Pathway, so it's one where we have industry sessions. We have a number of different entrepreneurs that come in from different industries and we'll give talks. We'll have pitch events. So generally we'd like to characterize sort of 2 different types of pitch event. We have pitch events that we would characterize as community pitch events. These are ones where there is really no threshold of quality, that everybody that wants to pitch is part of that pitch event. It's one where the community gets together and helps give suggestions and really hone everybody's pitches. But naturally, these are ones where, as a school and as going out there and attracting people, we're not gonna try and target investors or bring people in to say this is the best pitches we have. And then there are what we'll call premier pitch events, right? Which are done in concert with the Entrepreneurship Center. And these are ones where it'll be pitches from our program, also Accelerate Cambridge from the Entrepreneurship Center. And these are ones where, yes, there needs to be a quality threshold. We need to be able to hit that, and we want to, but this is stuff where generally we'll do one in London, and it can be a London and a Cambridge one, where we'll go out to people and try and get investors, and these again are just a higher threshold of quality. We also try and sort of pepper in relevant content. I'll say this is, I'll talk a little bit more, but even in March, right? So we had, with the crisis hitting, we tried to bring in, we adapted there and brought in some special speakers on topics really relevant at that point. So then let me talk a little about year 2 is one where the first part of year 2 is where there's a research methods course just to transition us into the major project, right? Then in December is when we start thinking, so the research methods culminates in, okay, now I have a proposal of what I'd like to do for the remainder of the second year, the major project. And the major project, the best way that I like to describe it to people, it's one where it's meant to be aligned fully with whatever your venture is, whatever it is you're working on, right? But it is going to be something that you're going to study more deeply than you would if you weren't in an academic program, right? So the other way to say it is, if you were not in the academic program and you wanted to research something, you would not go to that same depth. It wouldn't be economically viable, right? But we want you to dig into it, get a depth of understanding in one dimension, right? So generally, an example would be if someone's trying to build trust within their venture, and they're trying to figure out how do they build trust. They could look back at other past studies and say, how do people typically look at this? How does this change within my venture? And try and generate some insights on that, right? That's really what the whole second year is about, is digging deep into this. There's projects that I'm advising are ones where, there's one that's looking into how do entrepreneurs what are the traits of entrepreneurs in terms of opportunity identification, right? All of these, the topic varies greatly. And for that, you'll get in addition to the mentor that you have in the course, you'll also have an academic supervisor, right? So throughout the whole course, you have a mentor, and in the second year, you have an academic supervisor. Okay, given this structure, let me speak just a little bit more on, how has the COVID crisis kind of impacted us? I think there's the obvious, right? So if we look at these pictures, the top bit was our residential in December, and actually there's Tatiana, right? So she didn't know, that wasn't a purposeful call out there, but so we could see the students from the second year enjoying themselves up at by Churchill College at the Muller Center. There was a sort of a team building exercise. This was the last residential they were having, and sort of it was nice to signify going off. They did a rocket building exercise. For that, our first year students will also recognize that. And then we have the bottom, right? So the bottom is what we did in our March residential. Now the bottom row looks typical of just about every picture everyone sees of every single academic program right now, right? Everyone talking to screens and on Zoom figuring things out. I want to speak a little bit about what's not so obvious from the pictures, right? And what's a little bit different. I think first off, the March residential is one that that was the outcome. We ended up looking like that was right. This would happen the week before the UK had gone into lockdown, right? So this was actually in the judge. These were These were pop-up studios that the digital learning team had put together along with our program team in a matter of days. Pretty much since February, we've been monitoring the situation. So it wasn't that we just went from physical residential straight to online. We had obviously growing concerns over what was going to be taking place, right? And so we had put plans in place. We'd already adapted from residentials are generally required, so it's required attendance. We had relaxed that assumption and said, no, we're not going to require attendance anymore, because the last thing we want to do is, if people don't feel comfortable within the current context, to require them to come to Cambridge. With that in mind, we had already had plans in place to run in parallel online with physical. So we were set up to say, whoever wants to come here, whoever doesn't, don't, and we'll accommodate both. The trajectory started to tilt upwards and get worse. And literally days before the residential, the call was made that we really needed to go fully online. So we went fully online, and then we were able to add in, you see on the bottom left is our Dean Christoph Locke, who gave a talk on unknown unknowns. On the right is Danny Ralph from the Center for Risk Studies, where they have modeled pandemics and understand how all this works. We brought Danny Ralph in to give a talk on risk. We brought Ben Lawson in to give a talk on supply chain disruptions and how to manage disruptions. And so it was one of these things where everyone was very quickly able to adapt and offer a content that was relevant. There's more to it than that, right? To me, as the director of the program, the thing that I was really struck by, and to me what was inspiring and really a positive moment, was it was a time where we really got to see the true colors of our students, right? So this, by no means do I want to try and brush aside that people were suffering loss, right? Everyone really looks forward to the residentials. This is not something we took lightly, and so we definitely had to acknowledge the loss. But at the same time, our students were incredibly resilient, right? Incredibly constructive, collaborative, leaned on one another, right? And we opened up the residential, acknowledging, how much we wished we were together, but we also acknowledged that, look, if any community can adapt and be resilient and find the good in this and move forward, it was us, right? And so as a community, we sort of put out the call in the first session to say, you know what? One of the really big benefits of this is, rarely is there ever a time when, the whole school, let alone the world at this point, is so aligned around figuring out how to make online education work, right? And our program is 90% online. So if we can embrace this and experiment in finding ways to do things, we stand to benefit in the long run more than anybody else, right? And so we actually did, in that opening session, we started saying, okay, let's trial the breakout rooms in Zoom, and let's start playing around with this. And immediately we started finding ways to, wait a second, we actually can connect with one another, and there are benefits to this, right? By no means am I trying to say it's a substitute for being in Cambridge and having your feet on the ground and getting all that Cambridge is. But it's one where, again, the beauty of and the qualities of our students really kind of surfaced and emerged. And that was something that was, I'm still now, impressed by and obviously proud of. So if we look at, how have we been impacted? The top bullet, right, is one that everybody is obviously experiencing a massive acceleration of online learning. But for us, it was one of saying, okay, how can we use this to expand our network, increase interactions, right? So one of the downsides of our program is traditionally been that there's just this large period of time in between the residentials where we don't get that much interaction. We have action learning teams, right? But that's a small group, and that doesn't always get together that much. So now we tried to say, okay, can we try small groups of just expanding the network and getting people to know one another? And that worked really well, right? We adapted the residential content. We're now trying to say, how can we spread that out? And we're again, piloting and experimenting with this. We're even now, we started trialing some online and virtual networking sessions, which have now been expanded. We're gonna do one with the second year cohort, right? So we did this, that was a first year residential. Now we're gonna try and do it with the second year cohort. These are things that once we start embracing them early on, we can expand them out for the long term. We had immense support from the school. And this is in terms of faculty, in terms of support, in terms of digital, and in terms of right now, it's one where we've really been, sort of leading the way in terms of how do you adapt online. So we have all the other programs, whether it's executive MBA or MBA or all of them, sort of coming to us to say, okay, how do you guys do this? And again, I want to be clear. This isn't, this is not something that the program team we've done this is very much student driven as well, right? So our students are really helping to drive this forward, right? And this is, to me, where it just really allowed the students to kind of show how much, their true qualities, right? So it's, again, I want to give a lot of credit to our student body. I think the important part of it is we are a program where all of these adaptations and all of these learnings, they don't go away once we get out of this crisis, right? So we will get through this crisis. We will come out the other side and be able to complement all of this with coming to Cambridge, being here physically, and getting all the benefits of, seeing each other in 3D and actually rubbing elbows again and getting back to that environment. But then on top of that, now we'll have the ability that we'll do better interactions in between residentials. We'll gain better familiarity with each other because we'll have more frequent interactions. All of that learning and all of the adaptations, that stuff remains. And so those are things that, I'm frankly excited I'm excited and like many of you, anxious to get through this and be able to complement the program with that. So at the end, the parts that I think are clear that have not changed from the program, right, is really what we deliver, right? We still aim to deliver an experience that, true entrepreneurs, to complement and provide them the skill sets, the knowledge, the support to reach their full potential. This has required us to become more flexible, right? So naturally, the crisis is impacting people in different ways, and so we have to recognize this and we have to try and adapt. And this is something that I give huge credit to not only our program team, but also the support staff within the larger Judge Business School, of saying, okay, we have to recognize we have to be more flexible. How can we be more compassionate and understand the situation and help people, right? Again, I had said a lot has just required adaptation, but still the community has, the interactions between members of the community, the support that people have provided each other, the support from the school to students, this is something that is just a key part of who we are. And the last bullet point, I think, is one of, when it comes to who we're looking for, obviously this doesn't change. If anything, the reaction that our students have had throughout this crisis has just further sort of solidified and cemented that, the people we are looking for, those are exactly the right sort of people, right? So we want, and who is this? We want people that, recognize the benefits of all the dimensions, all of the pillars that we have to offer, but also able to juggle everything that comes with this, right? We want people, if you look down at the stats here, we are a very diverse group. we want people that really seek to leverage that diversity, right? Diversity just in and of itself doesn't provide the benefits, right? You have to actually, this takes effort to get the benefits of diversity. But if you're willing to put the work forward and you're willing to work with one another, you're willing to acknowledge people, the benefits that come from a diverse class are huge, right? I think on that, this is probably, Kirsten hasn't kicked me off yet, so this is probably the good time to sort of close from this and try and answer the Q&A, because it's been enough of me talking directly. And I don't know, Kirsten or Lara, if you've had a chance to go through the chats, if there's questions that
so far we haven't had too many questions. We've had some general ones that I hope I answered, but if somebody feels that, you know, I didn't fully answer them, or they would rather direct them at Jeremy, please feel free to go ahead and ask your questions.